Chapter 8. In the Virupaksha Cave. Introductory quote. Sivaprakasam Pillai. Swami, who am I, and how is salvation to be attained? Sri Ramana, by incessant inward inquiry, who am I? You will know yourself, and thereby attain salvation. Subchapter. The simple life in the Virupaksha Cave. Soon after his mother and his brother returned home, Sri Ramana left Pavalakunru and moved up the hill. He lived for a short time in the Satguru Swami Cave on the southeastern slope, then in the Namasivaya Cave. He finally settled down in the Virupaksha Cave, where he remained from 1899 to 1916. The Virupaksha Cave is quite large and is about 330 feet above the Arunachala temple on the southeastern slope. The inner part of the cave contains the remnants of the Saint Virupakshadeva, who performed severe acts of penance there in the 13th century. At the time Ramana took up abode there, nobody felt responsible for the Virupaksha mutt, and the cave was empty. There was a lawsuit in progress between two different groups, who both claimed possession of and the income from the mutt. But as no decision had yet been made, nobody was caring for it. The issue of possession was, in fact, only resolved some years later. At the following Karthikai festival, the successful litigants came up to the cave and started charging a fee to visit it. So access to the Swami who lived there suddenly became conditional upon payment of a fee, although he himself was not informed of the matter. As large numbers of people were now coming up to see him, quite a few had to go away disappointed when they were told they had to pay. When Ramana heard about this practice, he left the cave and sat down under a tree. Those collecting the fees then declared this place also to be an outer area belonging to the mutt, and continued to demand money from all those who wanted to approach him. He had no alternative, therefore, but to go away again. At first he lived in the Satguru Swami Cave, which was lower down, then in another cave. Consequently, the Virupaksha Cave was no longer a source of revenue. The owners of the cave finally understood that they could not misuse the young Swami for their own purpose, so they gave up the fees they had collected and asked him to continue to live in the cave. As a result, Ramana returned and stayed there until 1916. In winter, Virupaksha was a fine lodging, but not so in summer, when the adjoining riverbed dried up and there was not the slightest breeze. In addition, as there were almost no trees, the cave was exposed to the sun so that it became unbearably hot. A little higher up the hill, at the foot of a mango tree, there was a cave known as the Mango Tree Cave. The nearby Mulai Pal Tirtham always had a supply of clean water. The first time Ramana had seen it, it had been uninhabitable. But since then, two brothers had removed the overhanging rock, had built a small wall with a door, and had made the cave inhabitable. They asked the Swami to use it, so he used to spend the summer months here. Life at the Virupaksha Cave and Mango Tree Cave was rich in privations but carefree, as Ramana himself stated. Palaniswami asked me to copy out and give him some stanzas of Shankara, but where were notebooks or paper with us at the time? I collected every scrap of paper I could, stitched them together into a notebook, wrote out the stanzas and gave them to him. At that time we had nothing but a pot. We did not have even a towel. In the early days of our stay in the Virupaksha Cave, Palaniswami alone had a towel to wrap around him. The cave had no iron doors then, it had a wooden door with a wooden latch. We would fasten it from the outside with a small stick, go round the hill, wander hither and yon, return after a week or 10 days, then open the door with the help of another stick. That was our key at the time, no need to keep it anywhere. This notebook was the only article we took with us. As Palaniswami wore a towel, he used to fold the book and tuck it into his waist. That was enough for us. Years later, this outer poverty had hardly changed at all. It is reported that Ramana had a single towel which was full of holes, and which he used both to dry himself after his bath and for the kitchen work. He used to hide it carefully so that nobody would catch sight of it. One day, however, when, despite his efforts, it was discovered, his followers at once started to look for some new towels. His loincloth was also in a poor state. "My kalpina got torn. I do not usually ask anyone for anything. Bodily privacy has, however, to be maintained. Where could I get a needle and thread available to mend the kalpina? At last I got hold of a thorn, made a hole in it, took out a thread from the kalpina itself, put it into the hole, and thus mended the cloth, and so as to hide the place where it was mended. I used to fold it suitably before putting it on. Time passed like that. What did we need? Such were those days. Sri Ramana never wore shoes, not even during the hottest months. Rangan, a former classmate, reports, when Bhagavan and I climbed up to the top of Arunachala, a thorn pricked my foot. Noting that I was lagging behind, Bhagavan removed it. A few yards later, a big thorn pricked his foot. When I looked at his foot, there were so many unremoved thorns in it. Then I examined the other foot, but the position was not different. "Which one will you remove, the new thorn or the old ones?" he queried. He broke the thorn by pushing his foot to the ground and started walking again. There was no cooking in the Virupaksha Cave. Visitors used to bring milk, fruits, cake, and other food. Gradually more followers came to live with Ramana and Palaniswami. Any food donated was always evenly distributed. But as it was not possible to rely on sufficient food for all being brought by visitors, Palaniswami and other devotees would go down to the town to beg for additional food. Then Ramana would mix up all the food donated, make a mash by pouring hot water over it, and gave each one a glassful. Often there was not even any salt to flavor it, but Ramana thought it better to be without than to beg anyone for it. If once we begin to ask for salt, we would feel like asking for dal, and when we ask for dal, we would feel like asking for payasam and so on. So we felt that we should not ask for anything and swallowed the gruel as it was. We used to feel extremely happy over such diet. Devotees asked Sri Ramana to compose a hymn to sing during the regular begging tours in town. So the famous Akshara Manamalai, the marital garland of letters, which is contained in the collected works, came into being. It is a deeply spiritual and heart-moving hymn in praise of the much-loved hill Arunachala, which the devotees now sang on their begging tours. Ramana remarked humorously, "Marital garland of letters fed us for many years. The begging mission to town followed a fixed course." At least 4 of Ramana's devotees started on their way, announcing their arrival to the inhabitants by blowing their conches. They then went through the streets singing and collecting what was given to them. As for kitchenware, there was only one earthen pot, later there was an aluminium pot, then one of brass. The pots grew in number. When Ramana's mother joined the community in 1916, she instigated regular housekeeping chores and regular cooking. But Ramana made it clear in several remarks that he preferred the simplicity of the years when they lived from hand to mouth. Some days there was not enough of anything, on other days there was more than enough eatables. At times Ramana, so as not to disappoint anyone, ended up overeating. There is a well-known story of how one day he planned a day of fasting and started off early in the morning to walk alone on the hill. There he met several women who competed with each other to serve him food. He had to eat all that they served him. Some hours later he met them again, and again they forced him to eat. Then he lay down in a mantapam to sleep. In the evening he wanted to return to the Virupaksha cave when a devotee met him, bringing him mangoes cooked in rasam. He ate this too. Jokingly he said, "It is like the story of the man who fled the town of mice and found himself in the land of tigers." Sometimes people would also send their carriages to pick him up for a meal, but he always refused, as he feared that if he accepted, there would be no end to the invitations. Subchapter: The first works come into being. Various people used to come up the hill to see the young Swami, the curious, the educated, who only wanted to test his knowledge, and spiritual seekers. Simple folk, children, even animals, all would come. Increasingly, visitors with spiritual questions came to have their doubts cleared and to have spiritual scriptures explained. Ramana would write the answers down on little scraps of paper or on a slate using a piece of chalk, as at the time he was not talking. One of Ramana's earliest disciples was Gambiram Sashaya, who worked as a municipal office overseer at Tiruvannamalai. He was studying the teachings of Vivekananda on different yoga techniques such as breath control, Raja Yoga and Jnana Yoga. As there were parts he did not understand, he used to bring his books and explain his difficulties. Ramana glanced over the books and answered the questions by writing down the essence of the teachings in simple Tamil on small scraps of paper. So, over time, Sashaya found himself the owner of a large bundle of scraps of paper covering the years 1900s to 1902. He copied the answers given into a small notebook. When Sashaya died in the late 20s, the booklet was found in his belongings. His elder brother made it available to Ramanashram. It was eventually published as the earliest work of Sri Ramana with the title Vichara Sangraham, Self-Inquiry, which is also included in the collected works. Another of Sri Ramana's disciples was Sivaprakash Pillai, a philosopher who was employed in the revenue department. In the many books he had studied, he could not find the answer to his existential quest, "Who am I?" In 1902 he came to Tiruvannamalai for the first time on official duties. He heard about the Swami on the hill, visited him and asked him the burning questions that were troubling him. Again, the answers were written down by Ramana on the floor or with chalk on a slate. Afterwards, Sivaprakash Pillai made notes of the questions and answers from memory. In 1923, he published them under the title Nan Yaru, Who Am I?, which is again found in the collected works. Nan Yaru starts with the following introduction: "As all living beings desire to be happy always, without misery, as in the case of everyone, there is observed supreme love for oneself. And as happiness alone is the cause for love, in order to gain that happiness which is one's nature and which is experienced in the state of deep sleep, where there is no mind, one should know oneself. For that, the path of knowledge, the inquiry of the form, Who am I?, is the principal means." In the following passage, Sri Ramana explains in greater detail what is meant by the quest and how it should be undertaken. See also Chapter 18. What was explained by Sri Ramana to his early disciples in his first works, when he was barely more than 20 years old, has remained unchanged over the years. Above all, Nan Yaru contains the essence of what Ramana taught throughout his life. When newcomers used to arrive at Ramanashram and ask him about his teaching, he would point to this booklet. He insisted that it should be sold so cheap that even the poorest could afford it. It must be stressed that Ramana himself never felt moved to formulate his teaching of his own accord, either verbally or in writing. His writings, of which there are few, came into being as answers to questions asked by his disciples or through their urging, with the exception of a few hymns, which were his own initiative. Subchapter: Ganapati Muni. Ganapati Sastri, also called Ganapati Muni, Muni means the wise, the scholar, the saint, was the most famous and erudite of Sri Ramana's disciples. He hailed from Andhra Pradesh and was a Brahmin. In his youth he had already written literary works and could speak and write Sanskrit fluently at the age of 14. When he was 22, he took part in a meeting of learned Sanskrit scholars and writers. He was awarded the title Kavya Kanta, one from whose throat poetry arises spontaneously because of his virtuosity in poetical improvisation. In 1903, he came to Tiruvannamalai for the first time to practice intense tapas, spiritual ascetic exercises. He stayed for 1 year, and during that time he twice visited the Swami, who was approximately the same age as himself. On both occasions his erudition was noticed. Finally, he took up the post of schoolteacher at Vellore. But it was the renewal of India which was closest to his heart and to which he devoted most of his energy. Through intense tapas, in particular through mantra japa, he believed he would obtain the energy required to achieve this goal. He dreamed of an ideal society based on the Vedas, in which there would be material prosperity and social justice, as well as spirituality. He used to hold long public discourses on this theme and soon gained a circle of followers. In 1907, he resigned his position as teacher in Vellore and returned to Tiruvannamalai at the time of the Karthikai festival, in order to practice mantra japa more intensely. He was driven by a deep dissatisfaction about his knowledge and abilities and overcome by gnawing doubt. He had achieved nothing concrete, despite the numerous extreme spiritual exercises and sacrifices he had performed and his intense study of the Holy Scriptures. He was unsure if he had understood the essence of the Scriptures at all and if his tapas was correct. Then he thought of the Swami. It was on the 9th day of the Karthikai festival, 18th November 1907, at about 1:30, when, in the midday heat, he climbed up the hill to the Virupaksha Cave. He was trembling with emotion. The young Swami was seated alone in front of his cave. Although, because of the festival, there were crowds of people everywhere, there was nobody at all near the Swami. Even Palaniswami was not there. Ganapati Muni fell prostrate on the ground, grasped Sri Ramana's feet with both hands and uttered trembling, "All that has to be read, I have read. Even Vedanta Sastra, the holy scriptures of Vedanta, I have fully understood. I have performed japa to my heart's content, yet I have not up to this time understood what tapas is. Hence have I sought refuge at thy feet. Pray enlighten me about the nature of tapas." For 15 minutes the Swami kept silent and looked at Ganapati, who sat at his feet full of expectation. Then he answered, "If one watches whence this notion of I springs, the mind will be absorbed into that. That is tapas. If a mantra is repeated and attention directed to the source whence the mantra sound is produced, the mind will be absorbed in that. That is tapas." This was the first time that Sri Ramana gave a verbal answer to a question. Until then he had kept silent and had always written the answers down. It is remarkable how he led the mantra practice of his new disciple back to the method of self-inquiry. For Ganapati Muni this was a real revelation. His heart was filled with ecstatic joy, and he meditated at the feet of his new master until the evening. The following day, Ganapati Muni wrote full of enthusiasm to his family and his disciples, "I have found my master, my guru. He is the sage of Arunachala, known as Brahmana Swami. He is no ordinary Swami. He is a great seer, a mighty spiritual personality. To me and to you all, he is Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi, elevated great seer Ramana. Let the whole world know him as such." From that moment on, the Swami became known as the Maharshi, Bhagavan, or simply Ramana. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to Biography Central channel and share with your friends. This will help us reach more viewers.